Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, May 26th, 2016. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, our roving reporter Will Gallaspy talks to craft brewing pioneer Ben Middlemiss, who played a big role in stemming the fizzy yellow tide of mediocre beer in New Zealand. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And if you buy any of our DVD combos, you get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener, which is a very cool thing. And don't forget to get a copy of our Brewer's Logbook. You can use it to log and track up to 50 batches of beer. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We also have a show page, Basic Brewing Radio, and Basic Brewing video page on the facebook.com/Basic Brewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon shopping, big or small items, think of us first. Go to basicbrewing.com, click on our ad on the right-hand side of the page. It'll take you back to Amazon where you can shop as you normally do. You won't notice any difference. It won't cost you any extra. But you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we greatly appreciate your support. Lots of items being purchased this past month. We greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own Magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry Podcast Directory. We're on the Stitcher app. We're on Google Play Music as well. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our virtual guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. And thanks to everybody who's done so already. And I'll send you an email with links to bonus content from the previous 3 years if you do that. If you are a follower of this podcast or have perused the archives over the years, you probably know that we take the month of June off from posting audio episodes. We're off gathering content at the National Homebrew Conference, gathering family memories on vacation, gathering moss. I don't know. Well, I looked at the calendar this year, and there are 5 Thursdays in June this year. And, I think it's just excessive to deny the world 5 weeks of this marvelous gift to humanity. So I'm going to encroach on sacred June territory and post a second interview from Will Gallaspy next week. It's a great interview with Kelly Ryan of Fork and Brewer in Wellington. So look forward to that. Kelly's a brewer who really, it's a cliche, but he thinks out of the box. He thinks out of the brew kettle and brews some beers that are really interesting with local New Zealand ingredients. So you can glean some good homebrew information from him. But after next week, 4 weeks of audio podcast silence. So I do think that Steve Wilkes and I will be able to get together and post some video episodes. Steve is retiring from his job at the university, and at least for a bit, he will likely have more time to spend around the brew pot and in front of the camera. So look forward to that. And you know what brew pot he's going to be spending time around? That brew pot that he's going to be spending time around is an electric brew in a bag setup from our sponsors, Desiree and Dave, from High Gravity in Tulsa. Steve has the smaller 120-volt unit that can brew 3 to 5 gallons, and I have the larger 240-volt unit that can brew 4 to 10 gallons. His has a rating of 2,250 watts, and mine is 4,500 watts. The difference, of course, is that mine can raise 8 gallons of water or wort, 4 degrees Fahrenheit per minute, while Steve's does 2 degrees per minute. And if Steve is in a hurry, he can put his kettle on the stove and use his stovetop to help boost the heat along with the electric element in there. However, Steve says that the high-gravity unit does great on its own. He brews outside on his deck. And he says it's a much more efficient way than his old method of using his electric kitchen stove by itself. I mean, that thing was so underpowered that he used to do things like split batches into 2 kettles to come up to the boil more quickly. But luckily for Steve, those days are gone, thanks to his high-gravity electric brew-in-a-bag system. You can see videos of Steve and me demonstrating the systems at youtube.com/highgravitybrew. We brewed a batch of beer with my system, and we also demonstrate, or we show the difference between his system and my system in another video. And also there's another video on their YouTube channel, youtube.com/highgravitybrew, where Desiree and Dave take a look at the different control systems that they sell that can control the temperature and also control pumps. And they do things. I believe that some of their systems are working in professional environments, commercial breweries. So all the way from single vessel systems to multi vessel systems, they've got the controllers and the setups that can fit your needs. You can see all of that stuff at highgravitybrew.com, and we greatly appreciate Desiree and Dave for their support, and we look forward to seeing them in Baltimore in June at the Homebrewers Conference, highgravitybrew.com. Now, I didn't expect to get so much content from our trip to New Zealand, but my philosophy is get as much good stuff as you can wherever you go, because travel is expensive, and not only in funds but in time as well. And anytime I leave the region, I want to try to get as much stuff as possible. And this time we had help from our friend Will Gallaspy, who is brewer at 32 North in San Diego. We've known Will for a long time. He used to brew here in Northwest Arkansas, and then he went out to Brooklyn and brewed there for a while. Now he's in San Diego. It turns out that not only is Will a talented brewer, but he's a natural at interviewing other brewers as well. And Will met Ben Middlemiss at Marchfest in Nelson and grabbed the opportunity to interview him right on the spot. Will Gallaspy, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hi there, it's good to be here.
We've become all New Zealand all the time here on Basic Brewing Radio. We got so much good content down there, and we've run out of the stuff that I've recorded. But you became our kind of a New Zealand stringer correspondent reporter down there.
That's right. I actually kind of followed a different itinerary. I got into the country, I think, a day or two earlier, and made my way from Auckland down to Wellington and then down to Nelson. And I made a number of stops along the way to talk to local producers, not only of beer, but also of cider and mead, and learn what I could. New Zealand has so many wonderful resources, types of honey that can't be found anywhere else, herbs and plants that don't grow anywhere else. And of course, I wanted to understand the beer. So I talked to as many commercial producers as I could, since I'm a professional brewer. I'm very fortunate in that in my profession, there's kind of a mutual interest and a mutual courtesy, and other professional producers are usually more than happy to take a few minutes to talk to me about what they're doing. And so that's kind of what I did as I made my way through New Zealand.
Now, it's been several weeks since we went down there. Have you been able to integrate some of the things that you've learned and some of the things that you've tasted into your brewing experience yet up at over at 32 North?
Certainly. I definitely changed my mind a little bit about the way to use New Zealand hops. And one of the things I went there to do, of course, was to judge the Brewmania homebrew competition that was taking place at the Homebrewers Conference. And we made a deal where the first place winner of Brewmania could give us a beer recipe, and we'd take it back to 32 North and produce it for a New Zealand-themed brew pub in San Diego called Queenstown. So we did that. We took Pahia Pale Ale, which was brewed by a local homebrewer there named Sam Davis Talwar, who was kind enough to share his recipe, and we made his beer. We made Pahia Pale Ale, which has just gone on tap this week, actually, at Queenstown. It tastes delicious. I think, the big eye-opener for me drinking beer in New Zealand, and especially drinking the hoppier beers in New Zealand, was that they are not exactly hot bombs like we make. They're a little more balanced and a little more light-handed, and the flavors actually come through in a nicer way, I think. If you take a hop like Nelson or Green Bullet or something like that, and you really just dump it into a beer, you're possibly not going to get as nice a result as if you mix it in with something gentler like Matueka or Riwaka or something like that. They tend to use a lot of blends, and there's kind of an art to that, I think. And that's definitely something that I'm going to take forward in my approach when working with these New Zealand hops.
Americans' reputation and subtlety usually don't go together, so
That's right.
not to paint with too broad a brush, but so they're making some good beer down there now, but that hasn't always been the case. And you had an opportunity to talk to a gentleman who was a pioneer down there in kind of turning the tide, a yellow fizzy tide.
Yes, his name is Ben Middlemiss, and I bumped into him at the Homebrewers Conference, and I caught him at March Fest, and he was kind enough to share a few minutes to talk to me a little bit about his experience and about what he had seen in the history of the craft brewing industry in New Zealand. Very awesome. Really good to talk to him. I learned a lot that way. I think it's really important when you travel and you go to another country and you want to learn about beer in that country, that you not only go to, the new hot craft brew spots, but also, you go visit the dive bars and maybe the beer they used to make, that's not to say it wasn't good, but it was not craft beer as we know it. But I think it's important to taste, like a New Zealand chewy or whatever the local beer that's been around for 40 years that's popular and cheap. I think it's very important to taste that beer and to try that beer. It may not be a bad beer, and it kind of helps you understand. I guess it gives you context and a reference point for what the newer craft brewers are trying to do in that given spot. So to bump into somebody like Ben is great because he's kind of seen that transformation take place. He's watched the beer situation in New Zealand go from just a handful of producers making a very similar type of beer. It's not to say it was a bad beer, but he watched he's seen the situation move from being very homogenous to embracing more of what we know as a craft model here in the U.S., and he's been a big part of that. I would almost liken him to somebody like maybe Jack McCullough, in that he is kind of that bridge between the two eras. And so I talked to him as much as I could, tried to learn as much as I could about what beer used to be like in New Zealand, and maybe what those first craft beers that he made were like.
And the fun thing about it is that, nowadays the brewing world, I mean, literally the world of brewers, it has kind of gotten smaller because of the ease of sharing information and ingredients and techniques and things like that. Is that there's a ping pong effect. He was influenced by American brewers, and he's doing things that are now influencing brewers like you.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go on to our conversation, or your conversation, with Ben Middlemiss.
All right, I'm here at March Fest in Nelson, New Zealand with Ben Middlemiss, who is, Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in the brewing industry here in New Zealand?
Well, hi, Will. I've been in the game here since, I guess, one of the pioneers, been here involved in brewing in New Zealand since 1992. I was set up originally here in Marlborough, in Blenheim actually, and called the Marlborough Brewing Company. In the days when there was only about a small handful of brewers throughout the country who were keen on defying the odds and brewing craft beers or beers up against the mainstream breweries, which was quite daunting.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in the beginning, I started brewing beer for the brewery. We were producing 10,000 litres of beer per week, and we took a third of the market share against the mainstream breweries in the first month, and they were very upset with us. So one of the mainstream breweries took an extreme dislike to that and tried. The Dirty Tricks book came out, and every possible thing they could try to throw at us to upset us and ruin us failed, fortunately. And it was like the David versus Goliath scenario, and fortunately David won out. And it was hard though, because we were at beer festivals and we had people coming up to us saying, "Oh, you make this homebrew stuff, this homebrew product." And I said, well, it's not really homebrew, it's professionally made beer, and it's made on a smaller scale, and we put a lot more love and care and spend a lot more money on our ingredients, and therefore we believe our product is a much better result than you would expect.
Well, tell us a little bit about the beer those guys were making, the bigger brewers, and the beer that you were making and how it was different.
Well, the beer the mainstream brewers were making in their day was mainly around 3.8% alcohol and sold as a 4% beer. The Labelling Strength Act allowed them to be able to have a margin and sell it at beer that was 3.8, but they could sell it marked as 4 and be legal. Quite mediocre, bland beer, but popular in the populace at the time. Very low hops, very low carbonation, very low use of malt character, a very one-dimensional beer, as the type of malt produced in New Zealand to make the product was very lager-based. And so the beers that have been produced here in New Zealand in the early days since the 60s through to now, or more recent times, have been lager-based products, and they make what they call a blonde beer, which is a mainstream beer they produce and then alter it prior to bottling by various injector methods of addition of caramel, sucrose, flavourings, colourings, to produce a different style of beer and or different taste in the beer. And when we started brewing our beers, we wanted to make it entirely from scratch, using the best malt that we could find available. And we started importing malt from Europe and the UK, and that was one of the reasons we took the third of the market share very quickly, because our product was, we believe, had a superior flavour, and a lot more love and passion went into the product than was being produced at the time by the mainstream breweries.
Was it very difficult for you to get quality ingredients here in New Zealand at that time?
You certainly couldn't source them here, except for the hops. The hops were very good, a lot less varieties than available today. But the malt character that you could buy, the malts produced in New Zealand were really made and destined for the mainstream breweries, and therefore they were really destined to make lager style beer of not much character. So to have a decent ale malt or anything like that to produce much flavour and character and specialty malts had to come from either Europe or the UK, and people were either importing those malts themselves or getting somebody who had the expertise and time to import the malt into New Zealand from other countries, and therefore became a very flourishing growing market at the time for these ingredients.
New Zealand does have such unique hops. I assume the local large brewers were maybe using some of those hops too. Varieties like Stricklebracht or New Zealand Super Alpha, which we now call Dr. Rudy. Did that hop character come through even in the kind of what you call mainstream beers that the larger breweries were making?
No, they didn't, unfortunately, because beers, hops such as Super Alpha were called, the name came from the desire for the breweries to use, when they're really accountancy run, to use as little hop as possible, and that saved them a lot of money. So they were always pushing for the development of high alpha hops, so they could use a lot less in the bittering, because hops in New Zealand were only used in a bittering mode in the mainstream breweries. They weren't interested in adding hops down the track for character, flavour or anything else. All they were concerned about is the bitterness level, and so therefore the beers lacked a lot of character from that respect. until the craft brewery started up in the 90s, then hops were starting to be used as we believe they should be, when there's so much depth of flavour and character that could be produced. And it was as a result of that down the track that the mainstream breweries were missing out, as that they realised they had to start producing more beer that actually started to use more hop in the product. We used to have a saying amongst ourselves that the mainstream breweries, they didn't actually use the hops in the normal fashion. They used to open the kettle and show a photograph of a hop to the brew. That's how, unfortunately, lacking in hop character the beers were in those days.
So then tell us about the product you put out that quickly took a third of the market.
Okay, well, the beer we produced, the product we produced in Marlborough Brewing at that time, was sort of more or less aimed at the mainstream market, because that's where the owners of the breweries wanted the new brewery wanted the beer to be, but they wanted to have more flavour development, more character. So I started adding hops in way back then, in various stages throughout the brewery for my brewing experience in younger days, to get the resulting flavours and characters which they weren't used to. And initially, people were unsure, but they loved the flavour so much that they took to it like a duck to water, and there was no turning back. There was no looking back, and the public lapped it up from the day one, really.
And what was that beer called?
Marlborough Draft. It wasn't a great a name that leapt out there, but because, funnily enough, draft beer in New Zealand is sort of looked at as a style rather than an actual fact it's a tap beer, but they used to think draft was a style of beer in New Zealand. In some cases they still do. But that people used to love going and drinking draft beer at the pub, and when they found something that had a lot of depth of flavour, malt profile and hop flavour coming through, that was a winner from day one, and we did very well from that beer.
So tell us a little bit about what a draft beer is exactly.
Well, really, technically, anywhere in the world, a draft beer is any beer drawn from a tap.
Right, but in the New Zealand sense, if it's a style.
Yeah, they even in the competitions in New Zealand, they have draft beer recognised as a style, which is pretty bizarre. But that's the way it is. Draft beer is still looked upon by a certain sector of the drinking population as being some of the types of beers that are typically produced by the large breweries, and some of the smaller breweries actually still try to emulate that to capture some of the drinking market that will drink that style of beer, rather than encourage them to drink something more interesting, more depth of flavour or character. And because the mainstream breweries like to enter in these competitions, their beer style, some of the beers they make, wouldn't fit into the styles as we recognise them today. So the draft section is created, or New Zealand draft style, so they were able to be involved in those competitions.
So a draft beer would be what colour, what gravity, about how bitter?
It's usually around 4% alcohol, 4% by volume. It's usually a very pale gold, maybe even going into a darker style of beer. It still could be called slightly darker, more almost bordering on amber. And it's still a popular drink amongst some of the population.
So you came out with Marlborough Draft, took a third of the market.
Yes.
What'd you do next?
Well, I wanted to produce something different, because I was producing this beer 10,000 litres a week, and I suggested to them we could produce a California Common, or steam beer. Oh, well, we shouldn't really call it steam beer, but we did here in New Zealand at the time, worrying about the fact that maybe we might get attacked for it, but we didn't. Fritz Maytag left us alone, fortunately. Yes, and so I produced this recipe for them, and that became their flagship beer, really. It became very, very popular, and they're more marketable product in bottles and draft. and it was sold at it got a bigger profit margin on that particular beer, but it was really packed full of flavour. And then I felt frustrated after that because I couldn't go much further with the company. The shareholders were happy to stick with those two beers, and I went on to start the Cock and Bull chain of pubs up in Auckland, the brewery pub chain, and then started producing lots of different beers, including wheat beers and anything I wanted to make. But I had a blank board, a blank slate to start with, so it got very exciting for me where I could produce many different styles and flavours that became very, very popular in their own right.
Now, at the time that Cock and Bull opened up, were there many other microbreweries in the North Island?
No, there was in Auckland. There was one that just started before us that specialised in English ale, a place called Galbraith's Ale House, and the other one was a little bar in town called the Shakespeare Hotel, which had been operating since 1987 and producing outstanding beers, and that was that. It was still looked upon by people as sort of a home brew thing. They didn't know what to call it because they didn't think that anyone else outside the mainstream breweries could make beer. And that was our task to prove them wrong.
And so what year was it at this point when you're kind of in the thick of things at Cock and Bull, things are going well and you're pouring a lot of different beer styles?
1995.
So that would be 1995.
Yes.
And how long were you with Cock and Bull?
I stayed there and developed as a founding partner till the end of 1997, and then went on to work for Galbraith's Ale House and improve their English ale, the beers at the time, and brewed there for a couple of years, and then set up my own label at that time to set up some bottle beers. And Michael Jackson was a friend of mine back from the early 90s.
Really?
I had looked after him in Australia and drove him around the breweries in Queensland, and we flew him out into Auckland, and he was very keen on the beer that I was producing and gave the Michael Jackson's 500 beers of the world. I got 3 pages in his book on that particular book, which has been like a letter of introduction to me ever since. All those years ago, I can go anywhere, including America. Most breweries have that book, and I can refer to it, and they can. It's like a resume in there, in a sense. They can read up what Michael had to say about the beers at the time. The 3 main beers I was producing, which was under the Australis label, which was Hodgson, Benediction, and Romanov Baltic Stout, and that did make a big difference for me and getting involved further in the industry.
And then between the mid-90s and, let's say, the early 2000s, how did you see things change here in New Zealand?
Well, I saw a growing number of new breweries starting to emerge, and like a lot of places, when you get a sudden inrush of new places, there were some that foundered quite quickly because their product was pretty bad. They had a lot of problems, and there were guys out there that thought, oh well, like I can just make, anyone can do this, but they couldn't, So there was a natural attrition rate where the ones that weren't very good just popped away, and the ones that were good flourished and are still there today. And there were changes in the public's reaction to craft beers, but it wasn't until the last 6 or 7 years there was just like this explosion occurred in New Zealand, and a resurgence overseas, including America, but they'd already gone through this years before. But it's just it was a massive explosion of interest and sudden popularity of craft beer just grew enormously, and I think it's on this enormous roller coaster ride. I think it's going to be on the up, hopefully forever. But I can't see it waning at the moment. And when you see women who didn't ever, initially women used to approach me and say, I don't like beer, what have you got to offer? To nowadays who understand beer intimately and understand the styles, and in fact know a lot more about beer than a lot of guys do. It's the best thing I think I've ever seen. It's very heartwarming, and I'm very glad to be part of the whole industry.
Maybe you can answer just one more question. I go around, I'm here to learn about New Zealand beer and what makes a good New Zealand-style ale. And a lot of the breweries are actually putting forth a lot of American-style ales on the market and are very interested in brewing with American hops. Yeah. At what point, if you could pinpoint it, did breweries here become very interested in making American-style beer, and what caused that?
I think I would have to maybe put that down to my protege who I taught worked with me at the breweries years ago at Steam Brewing in Auckland, was Luke Nicholas, who's famous for his Epic brand. Luke had come back from California after trying a lot of American hop beers and he's very excited with the scene there, and he's been a very driving force in the early days, and of course now there's a lot of other people producing very American hop beers around the country, but in the early days it was basically Luke. Epic beers, he was so importing so much American hop where really other people are brewing very small amounts, and it's become so popular that it's a worldwide thing now. But the flavours and the aromatics of the American hops are great. And conversely, it's very interesting for me as a Kiwi being in America last year, brewing over there and finding the New Zealand hops being extremely popular and brewing over there, and it's, I guess, you're used to the hops in your own country and it's very nice to have the flavours and aromatics from another country, and then in America it's finding that the same. Of course they're so different from each other. It's a great thing to be able to share.
One last question. I go around and I ask all the Kiwi brewers I meet, what to you makes a good New Zealand beer? And the first answer is pretty much always the hops.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's one other thing, is the New Zealand malt now too, which is emerging. Because malts, traditionally the craft beers in New Zealand have been made with malts coming in for a while, been made from imported malts. But now there's some local malt being produced at Canterbury, which is extremely good. Lots of interesting characters and flavours, and it's something that needs to happen, I think, here to get more local character into the beer. And I mean, I never thought I'd see the day when great ale malt was produced in New Zealand, and this passionate family down in Canterbury are doing it, and a lot of brewers are using their malt. There's some great malts coming from overseas, but it's so wonderful too to be able to use local malt, and the local hops have always been good quality, and now we have such a big variety available to us, and quality and style of aromatics and flavour and bitterness. I think we're really poised to become a big force in the industry worldwide.
Can I ask, what's your favourite New Zealand hop?
Oh, it's a mixed one at the moment. I'm very fond of Motueka. I'm very fond of Nelson Sauvin. It's hard. I guess people ask me that about beer. What's my favourite beer? And it's always a different answer, because it's my mood, it's my food, it's what I feel like on the day, and that will determine the beer and the type of hop I like. I love New Zealand hops in general, but the more recent varieties of hop produced in New Zealand are my favourites. So just outstanding.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Cheers.
No problem.
Well, thanks again to Will. And thanks to Ben for spending some time talking for the podcast. Look for his beers from Ben Middlemiss Brewing. I'm not sure how far those beers get, far in a field of New Zealand, but beer hunter Michael Jackson was a fan. So, if he spent 3 pages talking about Ben Middlemiss's brewing, it's got to be good stuff. Next week, another interview from Will. Kelly Ryan from Fork & Brewer in Wellington, New Zealand. He's a brewer who's, as I said at the beginning, thinking out of the box and brewing some really interesting beers from local ingredients. It's a great conversation. And then podcast silence on the audio side until July. Until then, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form at basicbrewing.com. Please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All-Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. Get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can find our log books where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer. Check all of that stuff out at basicbrewingshop.com. As I said in the beginning, it's been a busy month for the Amazon link. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. We greatly appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Weber Genesis 637 square inch, 38,000 BTU natural gas grill, black. Very cool. Getting ready for summer. And 2-ounce amber glass bottles for essential oils with glass eyedropper. You wouldn't want a glass eyedropper. You want the glass eyedropper. And a bonus item this week, since everybody was so active, a Stairmaster SM5 step mill with 2-window LCD console. Holy smokes. Thanks again, everybody. Like I said, big items or small items, it doesn't matter. It all adds up, and we greatly appreciate all the generous support that you guys are helping us out with. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. We greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. We like to support those folks as well. And that's all. Until next time, summertime's a-coming. Hot, hot summertime. Summertime in Fayetteville. We're not in Fayetteville. Well, Steve's in Fayetteville. Hot, hot summertime. All right. I'm blathering now. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer, production help for Basic Brewing Radio, and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.